My wife told me, "Your family's issues aren't my burden," when my brother needed support. I replied, "You're completely right." Then, when her sister, well, hello there, name's Lucas Hartman, 29 years old, and apparently married to the self-appointed CEO of Boundaries Incorporated. You know the type, the woman who's got more personal mantras than a yoga instructor on Red Bull. My wife Sophie, sweet 27-year-old Sophie, has turned boundary setting into an Olympic sport, and brother, she's going for the gold every single damn day. Her absolute favorite phrase, and I mean she says this thing like it's tattooed on her tongue, is, "Not my mess, not my problem." She delivers it with the confidence of someone reading a company mission statement off a motivational poster. The kind you see in office break rooms right next to the broken coffee machine and expired creamer. You know what I'm talking about. Those inspirational quotes that make you want to chuck your stapler at the wall because Karen from accounting just used the last paper towel and didn't replace the roll. I used to think Sophie's whole boundary thing was actually pretty cool. Like, wow, look at my wife being all confident and self-assured. She knows what she wants and won't let people walk all over her. How refreshing, right? How modern and empowered. I was basically patting myself on the back for landing such a strong, independent woman. Yeah, well, hindsight's a real son of a bitch, isn't it? Because what I initially mistook for confidence was actually just good old-fashioned selfishness wrapped up in Pinterest quotes and delivered with the smugness of someone who thinks they've cracked the code to life. Everything in our little domestic paradise was cruising along smoother than a Cadillac on fresh asphalt until that Tuesday when my phone rang. You know how some phone calls just hit different? Like you can tell from the ringtone that your life's about to take a left turn into crazy town? This was one of those calls. It was my younger brother Adrian on the other end. And let me tell you, this kid's voice was cracking worse than a 13-year-old asking someone to prom. Adrian's 24, but he sounded about 12 and scared shitless. Now, my brother's always been the type to handle his business quietly. He's not one for drama or asking for help. Hell, he'd probably try to perform surgery on himself before admitting he needed a doctor. So when he called me, voice all wobbly and defeated, I knew something was seriously wrong. "Lucas," he said, and I could practically hear him swallowing his pride through the phone. I've been sleeping in my car, man." Just like that. No build-up, no explanation, just boom. Your baby brother's homeless and living like a nomad in a Honda Civic. The kid looked like a raccoon that had lost its favorite trash can and was wandering the suburbs trying to figure out where the hell it belonged. You know that look. Hollow eyes, stubble that's more, I forgot to shave, than ruggedly handsome. Clothes that have seen better decades. Now, here's where any normal, decent human being would immediately spring into action. You'd clear off your couch, grab some sheets from the linen closet, maybe swing by the grocery store for some comfort food. Basic human decency, right? The kind of stuff they teach you in kindergarten about helping people who need help. So naturally, I told Sophie that Adrian just needed to crash on our couch for a few weeks while he got his shit together. Nothing permanent, nothing dramatic. Just temporary brother help until he could land a job and find his own place. Simple as ordering a pizza. Sophie's response: "Oh, this was gold." She looked at me with those big brown eyes, the same ones that used to make me melt when we were dating, and delivered her signature line like she was accepting an Academy Award. "Your family's issues aren't my burden, Lucas. Your family's issues aren't my burden." Let that marinate for a second. My homeless brother sleeping in his car during a particularly cold October isn't her burden. The guy who helped us move into our apartment, who always remembered Sophie's birthday, who brought her soup when she had the flu last year. Apparently he's just an issue that she can't be bothered with. Oh, okay, Oprah. Good to know where we stand. I'm standing there in our kitchen, looking at my wife, the woman I promised to love, honor, and presumably give a damn about each other's families with. And she's basically telling me that human compassion has office hours, and Adrian's emergency didn't file the proper paperwork. The way she said it, too. Not with malice or anger, but with this matter-of-fact tone like she was explaining why she doesn't eat gluten or watch reality TV. Just a simple life choice, nothing personal. Like my brother's homelessness was equivalent to her deciding she doesn't want to split an appetizer at dinner. I felt something shift in that moment. You know when you're watching a movie and suddenly realize the character you thought was the hero is actually the villain? It was like that, except instead of a plot twist, It was my marriage taking a hard right into WTF territory. Right? I said slowly, trying to process what I'd just heard. So when you said for better or worse at our wedding, there was apparently some fine print I missed about family emergencies requiring pre-approval from the Department of Sophie's Convenience. She didn't even blink. This isn't about our wedding vows, Lucas. This is about maintaining healthy boundaries. I can't be responsible for solving everyone else's problems. Everyone else's problems. Like Adrian was some random guy panhandling outside Walmart, instead of the kid who used to build blanket forts with me when we were 8 and 10. The same brother who drove 4 hours to be my best man at our wedding, who helped me pick out Sophie's engagement ring, who's never asked me for anything significant in his entire adult life. But sure, Sophie. He's just everyone else. That night, as I lay in bed listening to Sophie's peaceful sleeping while my brain ran laps around this conversation, I realized something pretty important. All those boundary setting, self-help mantras she'd been spouting, they weren't about being strong or independent. They were about being selfish and calling it empowerment. And the worst part? I was just starting to understand how deep this rabbit hole actually went. So here's the thing about my brother Adrian. He's got more pride than a peacock at a beauty pageant. Always has. Even when we were kids and Mom would offer him the last piece of pizza, he'd insist he wasn't hungry just so someone else could have it. Noble? Sure. Practical? About as practical as a chocolate teapot. After Sophie's little, not my burden speech the night before, I figured Adrian would probably decline my couch offer anyway. The kid's stubborn enough to turn down a life preserver while drowning just because he doesn't want to inconvenience the Coast Guard. But when I drove by the McDonald's parking lot the next morning, don't ask me why, maybe some weird brotherly intuition, and saw his beat-up Honda Civic tucked between a minivan and a pickup truck, I knew I had to do something. And Jesus Christ, what a sight that was. Picture this. My 24-year-old brother, who used to be the star of his high school wrestling team, curled up in the back seat of his car like a human pretzel. He had this blanket draped over him that looked like it had fought in both world wars, and maybe the Spanish-American conflict for good measure. The thing was more holes than fabric at this point. I'm talking Swiss cheese levels of ventilation. It was the kind of blanket you'd see in a disaster movie, except this wasn't Hollywood. This was my baby brother trying to sleep in a parking lot while soccer moms grabbed their morning coffee 10 feet away. I knocked on his window, and when he rolled it down, he looked like absolute hell. You know that special brand of exhausted that comes from not really sleeping for days, where your eyes look like they're being held open by sheer willpower and spite. That was Adrian. His hair was doing things that defied both gravity and common decency, and he had that particular smell that comes from using gas station bathrooms as your primary hygiene facility. Morning, sunshine, I said, trying to keep it light. Nice office space you got here. The commute must be killer. He tried to laugh, but it came out more like a cough. Yeah, well, the rent's cheap and the neighbors are quiet. That's when I made an executive decision that would probably land me in hot water with Sophie later, but honestly, I was past caring what the boundary queen thought about my financial choices. I pulled out my phone and started looking up budget motels in the area. Not the fancy places with continental breakfast and little shampoo bottles, mind you. I'm talking about the kind of establishments where the ice machine's been broken since the Clinton administration and the carpet's seen things that would make a CSI team weep. Come on, I told him. We're getting you a room. Lucas, no. I can't let you. Shut up, Adrian. You're not letting me do anything. I'm doing it because I want to, and if you argue with me, I'll put you in a headlock like when we were kids. And we both know I'll win. The Sunset Inn was about as depressing as it sounds. The kind of place where dreams go to die and bedbugs throw retirement parties. But it was cleanish, cheap, and most importantly, it had 4 walls and a roof. The desk clerk looked like he'd seen every form of human tragedy at least twice, which honestly made the whole transaction refreshingly drama-free. No judgmental looks. No questions about why a grown man was checking his brother into what was essentially a step up from a cardboard box. $1,400. That's what it cost to get Adrian set up for a month at the Sunset Inn. $1,400 that came straight out of my savings account. The same savings account that Sophie and I had been building up for our someday house down payment. The same money that she probably assumed would always be discussed and budgeted and approved by the committee of 2. But here's the thing about emergencies. They don't wait for spousal approval or budget meetings or PowerPoint presentations about fiscal responsibility. Sometimes you just gotta be Santa Claus, except instead of a red suit and reindeer, you've got a debit card and a brother who needs help. After I got Adrian checked in, we hit up the Walmart down the street. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to rebuild someone's entire life from the ground up using nothing but a Walmart shopping cart. But let me tell you, it's both humbling and weirdly empowering. We loaded that cart like we were preparing for the apocalypse. Canned goods, ramen noodles, basic toiletries, a few changes of clothes, and enough energy drinks to power a small aircraft. The total came to about $250, which in the grand scheme of things wasn't much, but watching Adrian's face as we filled that cart, priceless. The guy looked like he was about to cry right there between the Pop-Tarts and the instant coffee. Not sad tears, mind you, but that overwhelmed kind of crying that happens when someone shows you kindness when you're expecting judgment. "I'm gonna pay you back," he kept saying, like a broken record. "Every penny, I swear." "I know you will," I told him, and I meant it. Adrian's got more integrity in his pinky finger than most people have in their entire body. But that wasn't the point. The point was that family helps family, no questions asked, no spreadsheets required. The real kicker came when we found a halfway decent suit at the clearance rack. $38 for a navy blue number that fit him pretty well. Not exactly Armani, but good enough for job interviews. Adrian tried it on in the little dressing room, and when he came out, I barely recognized him. Gone was the defeated guy sleeping in his car. This looked like someone who could walk into an office and convince people to hire him. "Damn, brother," I said, adjusting his tie. "You clean up nice. Better hide that face from the hiring manager's wives, or you'll cause some workplace drama." He actually laughed at that, a real laugh, not the hollow sounds he'd been making earlier. And for the first time in days, I felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. Of course, that warm, fuzzy feeling lasted exactly until I got home and Sophie saw the bank account balance on her phone. You know that look your parents used to give you when they found out you'd been eating cookies before dinner? Multiply that by about 1,000, add some righteous indignation, and you've got Sophie's expression when she realized I'd spent nearly $2,000 without consulting the Department of Spousal Financial Oversight. "Lucas," she said in that tone that somehow managed to make my full name sound like a profanity. "What exactly did you do today?" I grabbed a beer from the fridge and settled into my favorite chair. "Well, honey, I turned into budget Santa Claus. Minus the beard, the elves, and the flying reindeer. But I've got the gift-giving part down pretty solid." Her eye roll was so dramatic, I'm pretty sure I heard something squeak. You know what's beautiful about watching someone's life turn around? It happens faster than you'd expect. One day Adrian's sleeping in his Honda like it's a studio apartment, and 3 weeks later, the guy's got more job interviews lined up than a reality TV show has dramatic reveals. That navy blue Walmart suit turned out to be worth its weight in gold. Adrian walked into his first interview at some logistics company downtown and apparently charmed the pants off the hiring manager. Not literally, thank God. That would have been a whole different kind of family crisis. But by the time he walked out of that building, he had a job offer, a decent salary, and what looked suspiciously like hope creeping back into his eyes. "I start Monday," he told me over the phone, and I could practically hear him grinning through the receiver. $42,000 a year, plus benefits. "And Lucas?" "They said if I do well in the first 6 months, there's room for advancement." I was sitting in my car in the Home Depot parking lot when he called, because naturally, Sophie had decided our bathroom faucet needed replacing, and apparently, I was the designated hardware acquisition specialist. "That's fantastic, man. I knew you had it in you. I already found a potential roommate, too," he continued, and now he sounded like a kid on Christmas morning. "This guy Derek from the office. He's got a 2-bedroom place in Riverside, and he's looking to split the rent. I could move in next weekend if everything checks out. Crisis solved. Problem addressed. Brother back on his feet in record time. You'd think this would be cause for celebration in the Hartman household, right? Maybe a nice dinner, a toast to families sticking together, perhaps even a grudging acknowledgement from Sophie that helping people sometimes actually works out. Yeah, well, you'd think wrong. Instead, Sophie acted like I'd smuggled a team of international drug dealers into our apartment complex instead of helping my homeless brother get his life together. Every conversation somehow circled back to my impulsive decision-making and my failure to consult her about major financial choices. She had this way of bringing it up during completely unrelated discussions, like some kind of conversational boomerang that always came back to smack me in the head. "Can you grab milk on your way home?" she'd text. "Sure thing," I'd respond. "Make sure it's the organic kind. We can't afford to waste money on products that go bad quickly." Some of us think about long-term financial planning. Subtle as a brick through a window, that one. But here's the thing about being married to someone who thinks she's the Buddha of boundary management. You start paying attention to patterns. And Sophie's patterns were more predictable than a sitcom laugh track. Every time she delivered one of her trademark boundary speeches, every time she explained why someone else's problems weren't her responsibility, every time she used phrases like self-care and emotional labor to justify basic selfishness, I started taking mental notes. Think of it as an invisible ledger. The kind accountants keep, except instead of tracking debits and credits, I was documenting every instance of Sophie's selective compassion. Every time she said, "Not my circus, not my monkeys," about someone else's genuine crisis. Every time she rolled her eyes when I wanted to help a friend or family member. Every time she made it clear that her world operated on a strict policy of what's in it for Sophie. The ledger was getting pretty full, let me tell you. There was the time her coworker was going through a messy divorce and asked if she could crash on our couch for a few days. Sophie's response: "I'm not running a homeless shelter, Lucas. She needs to figure out her own living situation." This from the woman who spent $300 on throw pillows the same week. Then there was the incident with our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who asked if we could help her move some boxes to her car after her hip surgery. Nothing heavy, just some personal items she was donating to charity. Sophie claimed she had a prior commitment, which turned out to be a Netflix marathon of some show about rich people being terrible to each other. Very pressing stuff. Or how about when my buddy Mike's dad was in the hospital, and Mike needed someone to watch his 10-year-old son for a few hours while he handled insurance paperwork. Sophie suddenly developed what I like to call convenient amnesia about our plans to help out. "I'm not comfortable being responsible for other people's children," she said, while simultaneously posting Instagram stories about how much she loved kids and couldn't wait to be a mom someday. The pattern was clear. Sophie's boundaries were like a nightclub with a very exclusive guest list, and the only person guaranteed entry was Sophie herself. Everyone else had to pass some kind of mysterious cost-benefit analysis that seemed to change depending on her mood and how much effort would be required from her personally. But I kept quiet about my little ledger. I smiled and nodded when she explained her philosophy to friends at dinner parties. I bit my tongue when she recommended self-help books about maintaining healthy relationships, while simultaneously demonstrating how to be completely unavailable to the people who mattered most. I played the role of the supportive husband who respected his wife's need for emotional boundaries. Meanwhile, that invisible ledger kept growing. Every entry was dated, categorized, and filed away for future reference. Because here's what Sophie didn't understand about her favorite boundary-setting mantras: they work both ways. You can't spend years training people to respect your limits without eventually teaching them exactly how those limits work. And boundaries, as it turns out, are a lot like boomerangs. What you throw out into the world has a funny way of coming back to you when you least expect it. The ledger was about to become very, very handy. I just didn't know it yet. Adrian moved out of the Sunset Inn on a sunny Saturday morning, and I helped him load his few possessions into Derek's pickup truck. He'd bought some new clothes, gotten a decent haircut, and looked more like his old self than he had in months. As he shook my hand goodbye, he slipped me an envelope with $300 in cash, his first payment toward what he insisted was a debt, even though I'd told him a dozen times it was a gift. "Family takes care of family," he said simply. "Thanks for reminding me what that looks like." I watched him drive away, feeling pretty damn good about the whole situation. My brother was back on track. Nobody had died or gone bankrupt in the process, and I'd learned something valuable about the difference between helping people and enabling them. Sophie, however, was still acting like I'd committed some kind of financial war crime. Little did she know that her reaction to this whole situation had just earned her a permanent spot in my ledger of double standards. And that ledger was about to become required reading. There's something almost poetic about the way life decides to test your principles. It's like the universe has this twisted sense of humor, sitting up there with a cosmic notepad, waiting for the perfect moment to say, "Oh, you think you've got it all figured out? Hold my beer." For Sophie and me, That moment came on a Tuesday night at exactly 2:17 a.m. I know the precise time because I was staring at the glowing red numbers on our alarm clock, wondering if the buzzing sound was coming from my phone, her phone, or maybe some kind of electronic fire alarm that was about to ruin our security deposit. Turns out it was Sophie's phone, vibrating against the nightstand like an angry hornet trapped in a mason jar. The thing wouldn't stop. Buzz, pause, buzz, pause, buzz. The kind of persistent calling that either means someone's dead, someone's in jail, or someone's drunk dialed the wrong number about 17 times in a row. Sophie bolted upright like she'd been shot from a cannon, fumbling for her phone in that special kind of panic that only comes from middle-of-the-night phone calls. Her hair was doing this gravity-defying thing that made her look like she'd stuck her finger in an electrical socket, and she was squinting at the screen like she was trying to decode hieroglyphics. "It's Melissa," she whispered, which was completely unnecessary since I was already wide awake and probably wouldn't be getting back to sleep until sometime next week. Now, let me tell you about Melissa. Sophie's older sister is 31 years old and has the decision-making skills of a toddler hopped up on energy drinks. She's the kind of person who thinks, why well oh, is a life philosophy rather than something teenagers post on social media before doing something stupid. Every family's got one. That relative who treats life like it's a reality show and they're the star everyone's supposed to root for despite their obvious character flaws. Melissa's greatest hits include getting fired from 3 different jobs for showing up hungover, dating a guy who turned out to be married twice, maxing out her credit cards on a business opportunity, selling essential oils, and most recently, deciding that her bartending income was sufficient to lease a BMW. Because nothing says financial stability like spending 60% of your paycheck on a car payment, am I right? Sophie answered the phone, and immediately I knew this wasn't going to be a casual, "Hey, couldn't sleep, wanted to chat" kind of call. The voice on the other end was doing that high-pitched, rapid-fire talking that drunk people do when they're trying to convince someone they're not actually drunk. It's like verbal gymnastics, except instead of sticking the landing, they usually fall flat on their face. "Slow down, Mel," Sophie kept saying. "What happened? Where are you?" From what I could piece together through the alcohol-soaked rambling, Melissa had been out at some trendy downtown bar, the kind of place where they charge $18 for a cocktail and everyone pretends the music isn't too loud to have an actual conversation. She'd been drinking with some friends, celebrating something that was probably not worth celebrating, and decided that driving home was a totally reasonable idea. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Melissa had managed to slam her BMW, the one she couldn't afford, into a parked car with enough force to set off both vehicles' alarms and probably wake up half the neighborhood. But here's where the story goes from oops, fender bender, to holy shit, call a lawyer, because instead of doing what any rational human being would do, like staying at the scene, calling the police, and accepting responsibility for her mistake, Melissa decided to channel her inner action movie star and try to flee the scene. Picture this, a drunk 31-year-old woman in heels and a cocktail dress, stumbling away from a car wreck like she's in some kind of discount version of Fast and Furious. Except instead of Vin Diesel and cool stunts, it's just Melissa tripping over her own feet while trying to pretend she was never there. The police caught up with her about 2 blocks away, probably because she was moving at roughly the same speed as a sedated turtle and leaving a trail of broken heel pieces and regret behind her. By the time they got her in cuffs, she was crying, mascara running down her face like some kind of abstract art project, claiming she was just trying to get home to her cat. She didn't have a cat. So there we were, at 2:17 in the morning, listening to Melissa explain through hiccups and sobs that she was currently sitting in a holding cell downtown, charged with DUI, hit and run, and probably whatever the legal term is for being a complete disaster of a human being while operating a motor vehicle. Sophie went into full panic mode faster than you could say family emergency. She was up and out of bed, throwing on clothes like the house was on fire, and we had 30 seconds to evacuate. Sweatpants, oversized t-shirt, sneakers without socks, the whole frantic ensemble. "We need to go get her," she announced, like this was some kind of military operation that required immediate deployment. "We need to bail her out right now." And that's when something beautiful happened. Something so perfectly timed and poetically just that I almost wanted to applaud. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was, cozy as a burrito under our comforter, and delivered the line I'd been unconsciously rehearsing for weeks. Your family's issues aren't my burden, Sophie. The silence that followed was absolutely glorious. Not the comfortable silence of a couple who understands each other, but the kind of silence that happens right before someone realizes they've been caught in their own trap. The kind of silence that makes you think you can actually hear someone's brain processing information and coming to some very uncomfortable conclusions. Sophie froze halfway through pulling on her sweatshirt, arms still tangled in the sleeves, looking at me like I'd just announced I was joining the circus. What did you just say? I pulled the blanket up to my chin and smiled, the kind of smile that probably should have come with a warning label. I said, your family's issues aren't my burden. Ring a bell? It's from your greatest hits collection. I could practically see the gears turning in her head, trying to find some way to differentiate between my homeless brother sleeping in his car and her drunk sister sitting in jail after committing multiple crimes. Trying to figure out how the boundaries that applied to Adrian somehow didn't apply to Melissa. That's completely different, Lucas. Is it though? And then I did something that still makes me smile when I think about it. I rolled over, pulled the blanket over my head, and settled in like I was planning to sleep until noon. Because suddenly, 2:17 a.m. phone calls weren't my problem anymore. The truth bomb had been detonated. Now I was just going to tuck myself in and see what kind of crater it left behind. You know what they say about karma? She's a bitch, but she's got impeccable timing. After Sophie spent the better part of 3 hours that night alternating between glaring at me like I'd personally invented original sin and frantically calling everyone in her contact list who might have 15 grand lying around for bail money, reality started setting in faster than a hangover after a tequila bender. Melissa's bail was set at $15,000. In cash. Not $15,000 in, I'll totally pay you back, promises. Not $15,000 in, my sister's really sorry and learned her lesson, apologies. But actual real-world money that needed to materialize from somewhere other than the good intentions bank and trust. Sophie managed to scrape together $1,500 for the bondsman. 10% of the total, which is apparently how the whole bail bonds industry works. Who knew? Not me, since I've never had a family member stupid enough to flee the scene of a drunk driving accident. But hey, you learn something new every day, right? The thing about bail bonds is that they get your sorry ass out of jail, but they don't magically make your legal troubles disappear. Melissa still had to deal with the whole multiple felonies situation, and last I checked, public defenders weren't exactly famous for their miracle-working abilities. Especially when their client's defense strategy apparently involved claiming she was really sorry and didn't mean for any of this to happen. So Sophie spent the next few days playing phone tag with every lawyer in the greater metropolitan area who specialized in DUI cases. And let me tell you, those conversations were not going the way she'd hoped. Turns out, competent legal representation costs money. Lots of money. The kind of money that doesn't grow on trees or magically appear in your checking account just because you really, really need it to. The first lawyer she called wanted $5,000 up front just to take the case. The second one wanted $7,000. By the time she got to the third guy, she was looking at retainer fees that would make a luxury car payment look like pocket change. And that was just to get started. Once they actually had to, practice law and stuff, the meter would keep running faster than a taxi in Manhattan rush hour. I watched this whole process with the kind of detached fascination you usually reserve for nature documentaries about predators hunting their prey. Sophie would hang up each call looking progressively more desperate, like someone who'd just realized they'd been playing poker with their mortgage money and everyone else at the table had better cards. These lawyers are insane, she complained after her fourth or fifth consultation. They want thousands of dollars just to look at her case. Crazy how people expect to be paid for their professional services, I replied, not looking up from my laptop. It's almost like they went to school for years and developed specialized skills that are in demand or something. She shot me a look that could have melted steel. This isn't the time for sarcasm, Lucas. When is the time for sarcasm? I want to make sure I mark it on my calendar so I don't miss it. 3 days after Melissa's grand debut as a fugitive from justice, Sophie came home with groceries that definitely hadn't come from our usual budget-friendly supermarket. We're talking prime ribeye steaks, fancy wine with an actual cork instead of a twist-off cap, and dessert that came from the bakery section rather than the freezer aisle. The kind of meal you see in movies when someone's trying to butter someone up for a favor. She cooked dinner with the focused intensity of a chef competing on one of those reality shows where getting eliminated means your dreams die a horrible public death. The steaks were perfectly seasoned. The wine was paired like she'd suddenly developed a sommelier certification, and she even lit candles like we were celebrating an anniversary instead of discussing her sister's legal troubles. "We need to talk about Melissa's lawyer," she said as we sat down to eat. And I have to give her credit. She managed to make it sound casual, like we were discussing weekend plans or what to watch on Netflix. I took a sip of the wine, which was actually pretty decent, and gave her my full attention. "This is about the steak dinner, isn't it? You're trying to soften me up with red meat and alcohol." Classic move. Very transparent, but I appreciate the effort. "I'm serious, Lucas. She needs a good lawyer, and the only way we can afford one is if we use some of our savings." Our savings. Not her savings. Not Melissa's theoretical future earnings, but our collective marital nest egg that was supposed to be for emergencies and future plans. The same savings account she'd given me grief about when I'd helped Adrian. Except now suddenly, it was a shared resource instead of something that required committee approval. I grinned at her across our candlelit table, feeling like a poker player who'd just been dealt a royal flush. Sounds like a her problem to me. Besides, I thought bail bonds accepted credit cards these days. Very convenient for modern criminals. Sophie's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean, her problem?" Instead of answering directly, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my voice memos until I found the one I'd been saving like a fine wine for just the right occasion. Sophie's own voice filled our dining room, clear as a bell and twice as damning. "Your family's issues aren't my burden, Lucas." The look on her face was priceless. Pure, unfiltered shock mixed with the dawning realization that her own words were about to be weaponized against her with surgical precision. She tried to grab for my phone, but I held it up high like a big brother taunting his little sister with her diary. "Give me that phone, Lucas." "Why? Don't you like hearing your own voice? I thought you were pretty proud of this particular speech. Very philosophical. Very boundary-setting. Very empowered modern woman." She slammed her wine glass down so hard I was surprised it didn't shatter. A little splash of red wine jumped out and landed on our white tablecloth like a tiny crime scene. "That's completely different, and you know it." "Is it, though? Help me understand the difference between my homeless brother and your criminal sister. I'm having trouble seeing the distinction." Adrian chose to be homeless. Melissa made one mistake. I nearly choked on my steak. Adrian chose to be homeless? Are you fucking kidding me? The guy lost his job through no fault of his own and couldn't afford rent. Meanwhile, your sister chose to drink, chose to drive, chose to hit someone's car, and chose to run away from the scene. But somehow she's the victim here. Sophie's face was turning that particular shade of red that usually meant she was about to either cry or throw something. Possibly both. "She needs help, Lucas. She could go to prison. And Adrian could have frozen to death in his car. But when he needed help, you had very strong opinions about boundaries and burdens. Funny how those boundaries seem to be more like suggestions when it's your family on the other side of them." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sophie stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time, trying to figure out when her pushover husband had developed a backbone and learned how to use her own logic against her. "So that's it," she finally said. "You're just going to abandon Melissa?" I leaned back in my chair and smiled. "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just maintaining healthy boundaries. You taught me that, remember?" Oh, the sweet, sweet taste of irony served with a side of perfectly cooked steak. The next morning, Sophie left for work without saying a word to me. Not, "Good morning," not, "Have a nice day," not even, "Go fuck yourself, you boundary-wielding asshole." Just stone-cold silence and the kind of door slam that makes your coffee mug rattle on the counter. It was the marital equivalent of a middle finger, and honestly, I was kind of impressed by the commitment to the bit. I was enjoying my second cup of coffee and scrolling through job listings, because apparently helping family members find employment was now my unofficial side hustle, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Roberto Vasquez, Sophie's dad, and immediately I knew this wasn't going to be a casual, "How's the weather?" conversation. Roberto and I have always gotten along pretty well. He's one of those old-school guys who believes in working hard, treating people right, and not making excuses when life kicks you in the teeth. The kind of man who fixes his own car, grills a mean burger, and has never met a problem he couldn't solve with either duct tape or common sense. Sophie's mom Clara is cut from the same cloth, practical, no nonsense, and allergic to drama, which made this phone call all the more interesting. Lucas. Roberto's voice came through the speaker with that particular tone that fathers-in-law use when they're about to lecture you about disappointing their daughter. We need to talk about Melissa. Good morning to you too, Roberto. Beautiful day, isn't it? How's the garden coming along? Don't be a smartass, son. Clara and I just got off the phone with Sophie, and she's telling us you refused to help with Melissa's legal fees. I settled back in my chair, suddenly very interested in where this conversation was heading. That's an interesting way to frame it. Did she also mention why I might be reluctant to open my wallet for her sister's legal troubles? She said you're being vindictive because of some argument you had about your brother. Some argument. Right. Like disagreeing about whether homeless family members deserve basic human compassion was just a casual difference of opinion, similar to preferring Coke over Pepsi or arguing about which Marvel movie was the best. Roberto, let me ask you something. When Adrian was sleeping in his car a few weeks ago, and I wanted to help him get back on his feet, what did Sophie tell me? There was a pause on the other end of the line. The kind of pause that happens when someone realizes they might not have all the information they thought they had. She said Adrian was an adult and needed to handle his own problems. Close, but not quite. She said, and I quote, "Your family's issues aren't my burden." She refused to let him sleep on our couch, even temporarily. Wouldn't contribute a single dollar to help him. Made it very clear that her philosophy was every person for themselves. Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear the gears turning as Roberto processed this information. She didn't tell us that part, he said quietly. Funny how that detail got left out of her victim narrative. So here's my question, Roberto. If my homeless brother wasn't Sophie's burden, why exactly is your drunk driving, hit-and-run daughter suddenly my responsibility? The silence that followed was so complete, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Roberto cleared his throat, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost that accusatory edge. We didn't know about Adrian, he said. Sophie never mentioned he was homeless. Probably because it's hard to explain how you can preach about family values while refusing to help family members who actually need help. But don't worry, Adrian figured it out on his own. He's got a good job now, found a roommate, got his life back together. Turns out, when you give people a hand up instead of lectures about personal responsibility, good things happen. Jesus, Lucas, why didn't you tell us what was going on? Because it wasn't your problem to solve, and honestly, I thought Sophie might eventually develop some basic human compassion. My mistake. I heard muffled voices in the background, Roberto talking to Clara, filling her in on this new information. When he came back on the line, he sounded tired. Clara wants to know if there's anything we can do for Adrian now. Maybe invite him over for dinner, welcome him back to the family properly. And that right there is the difference between good people and selfish people. Roberto and Clara's first instinct, upon learning their daughter had failed a basic humanity test, was to figure out how to make it right. Not to make excuses, not to blame other people, but to step up and do better. That's really kind of you both, but Adrian's doing great now. He'd probably love a family dinner though. Fair warning, the kid can put away more food than a linebacker during training camp. Roberto actually chuckled at that. Clara will take that as a personal challenge. She's been complaining that nobody appreciates her cooking anymore. Then his voice got serious again. Lucas, what Sophie did, that wasn't right. Clara and I raised her better than that. I know you did. But somewhere along the way, she got the idea that boundaries and selfishness were the same thing. And now she's learning that the rules she makes for other people apply to her too. So you're really not going to help with Melissa's lawyer? I took a long sip of my coffee, considering my words carefully. Roberto, let me tell you what I told Sophie. If Adrian had committed multiple felonies and then asked me to bankroll his legal defense, I would have told him to figure it out himself. Actions have consequences, and adults need to handle their own consequences. That's not cruelty, that's life. But what if Melissa goes to prison? Then maybe she'll learn that drunk driving and fleeing the scene of an accident are serious crimes with serious penalties. Maybe she'll figure out that her actions affect other people. Maybe she'll grow up. I paused. Or maybe she won't. But either way, that's not my responsibility to fix. Sophie's not going to like this. I laughed, probably longer than was strictly necessary. Roberto, Sophie stopped liking me the moment I started applying her own standards to her family. The woman who thinks my homeless brother isn't her problem is somehow shocked that her criminal sister isn't my problem. The math doesn't add up. She's going to be furious when we tell her we understand your position. Then maybe she'll finally understand what it feels like when the people you count on for support decide your problems aren't their burden. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling something I hadn't experienced in weeks: validation. Not from getting revenge or proving a point, but from knowing that decent people could still recognize the difference between right and wrong when presented with actual facts instead of carefully edited sob stories. My phone buzzed with a text from Clara. Dinner Sunday at 4. Bring Adrian. Making tamales. And then another one from Roberto. Thanks for setting us straight, son. Some conversations are overdue. Yeah, they definitely were. When Sophie came home that evening, she looked like someone who'd spent the day getting kicked in the teeth by reality. Her hair was doing that frazzled thing that happens when you've been running your hands through it in frustration, and she had that particular brand of exhaustion that comes from fighting battles you can't win on multiple fronts. My parents called me at work, she announced, dropping her purse by the door like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Oh yeah? How'd that go? I didn't look up from my laptop, where I was pretending to be very interested in an article about the best hiking trails in Colorado. Spoiler alert, I wasn't planning any hiking trips. I was just enjoying the calm before whatever storm Sophie was about to unleash. They said they understand your position about Melissa. Smart people, your parents. Always liked them. She made this noise that was somewhere between a growl and a sigh. They're not contributing to her legal fund either. Shocking. It's almost like reasonable people don't want to bankroll the consequences of drunk driving and fleeing the scene of an accident. That's when Sophie told me about Melissa's latest brilliant idea, a GoFundMe campaign. Because apparently, when you've exhausted all reasonable options for dealing with your self-inflicted legal troubles, the next logical step is to crowdsource your stupidity and hope the internet takes pity on you. The campaign was titled, Help Melissa Fight Unfair Legal Troubles, which was already a masterpiece of delusion. Unfair legal troubles. Like the justice system had just randomly selected her name out of a hat for persecution, rather than responding to her decision to commit multiple crimes in a single evening. The description was even better. Melissa had crafted this sob story about how she was a hard-working single woman who made one small mistake and was now being persecuted by an unjust system. She painted herself as some kind of modern-day Joan of Arc, except instead of fighting the English, she was battling the consequences of her own actions. One small mistake, I repeated, reading over Sophie's shoulder as she showed me the campaign on her phone. Is that what we're calling drunk driving and hit and run now? A small mistake? Like forgetting to put the toilet seat down or buying the wrong brand of coffee. She's desperate, Lucas. She doesn't know what else to do. Here's a crazy idea. She could take responsibility for her actions, accept whatever punishment the court decides is appropriate, and learn from the experience like a functioning adult. But Melissa, being Melissa, had decided that personal accountability was for other people. Her GoFundMe goal was set at $20,000, which she claimed would cover her legal fees and help her get back on her feet. The campaign included several photos of her looking appropriately remorseful and vulnerable, including one where she was clearly trying to make herself cry for the camera. For the first day or two, the campaign actually seemed like it might work. Melissa managed to raise about $300 from friends and family members who either didn't know the full story or were just throwing some pity money at the situation to make themselves feel better. Sophie was cautiously optimistic, checking the total every few hours like she was monitoring election returns. Then someone, and I have my suspicions about who, but I'm not naming names, posted the actual police report in the comments section of the GoFundMe page. Holy shit, what a beautiful disaster that turned out to be. See, Melissa's version of events involved phrases like minor fender bender and misunderstanding with law enforcement. The police report, however, told a slightly different story. It described a heavily intoxicated woman who had slammed into a parked car with enough force to deploy her airbags, then attempted to flee the scene on foot while yelling at the responding officers about how this was totally unfair and how she knew people who could make their problems go away. The report also mentioned that her blood alcohol level was nearly twice the legal limit, that she had an open container in her car, and that she had attempted to give the arresting officer a fake name. Apparently, in her alcohol-soaked wisdom, Melissa had decided to identify herself as Jennifer Lopez from Miami, which was both creative and completely fucking stupid. The comments section exploded faster than a shaken soda can. People started sharing the GoFundMe on social media, but not in the way Melissa had hoped. Instead of sympathy donations, she was getting roasted harder than a marshmallow at a campfire. The internet, as it turns out, has very little patience for drunk drivers who try to crowdfund their way out of consequences. This is what happens when entitled people meet the real world, read one comment that got over 200 likes. Maybe set up a GoFundMe for the person whose car she hit, suggested another. Jennifer Lopez from Miami? Girl, you couldn't even come up with a believable fake name while drunk. Maybe use some of that legal fund money for acting lessons. Within 48 hours, the campaign had become a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons. Melissa was being featured on social media accounts that specialized in documenting people doing stupid things and then asking for money to fix their self-inflicted problems. She'd become a cautionary tale about the dangers of drunk driving and the even greater dangers of asking the internet to subsidize your poor life choices. The donations stopped completely. In fact, some people who had initially contributed actually requested refunds through GoFundMe's platform. The campaign that was supposed to raise $20,000 ended up collecting a grand total of $47.33 before Melissa finally took it down in shame. But the damage was done. Screenshots of the campaign and the police report had been shared thousands of times across various platforms. Melissa's real name was now permanently associated with terms like drunk driving, hit and run, and Jennifer Lopez impersonator, which wasn't exactly going to help her job prospects in the future. Speaking of job prospects, that's when the second shoe dropped. Melissa worked, past tense, for a local charity organization that focused on helping at-risk youth make better life choices. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Here was a woman whose job involved teaching teenagers about personal responsibility and making good decisions, and she'd just become a poster child for the exact opposite. Her employer, understandably, was not thrilled about having their organization associated with a viral drunk driving scandal. The optics of keeping someone on staff who had just demonstrated such spectacularly poor judgment while simultaneously becoming an internet meme were, as they put it in their termination letter, incompatible with our mission and values. So now Melissa was unemployed, internet famous for all the wrong reasons, and still facing the same legal troubles that had started this whole mess. The only difference was that now everyone knew about it, and her chances of finding another job had gone from challenging to good fucking luck with that. When Melissa showed up at our apartment that evening, crying and begging for help, I was ready for her. I handed her a bottle of water and looked her straight in the eye. Hydrate, I told her with a smile. It's the only license you're keeping this year. Sophie accused me of being cruel. I told her it was just equality in action, same rules, applied evenly to everyone. The next morning, Sophie packed a suitcase and announced she was going to stay with her parents until I came to my senses. Take your time, I called after her as she dragged her luggage toward the door. The rent's still due on the 1st, by the way. You know what's funny about ultimatums? They only work when the person receiving them actually gives a shit about the consequences. It's like pointing a water gun at someone and threatening to get them wet, intimidating right up until they realize they don't mind being damp. Sophie lasted exactly 4 days at her parents' house before she came crawling back, and I use the term crawling both literally and figuratively. She showed up at our apartment looking like she'd been sleeping on a park bench instead of in her childhood bedroom, which was decorated with enough participation trophies and inspirational quotes to make a life coach weep with joy. Turns out, staying with Roberto and Clara wasn't the sympathetic refuge she'd expected. Instead of getting the poor Sophie, married to such a terrible man treatment, she'd been subjected to 4 days of what I like to call parental reality therapy. Roberto and Clara had apparently spent the entire time asking pointed questions about her treatment of Adrian, her expectations about family loyalty, and her general approach to problem solving. They keep asking me why I couldn't help your brother but expect you to help my sister, she complained, standing in our doorway like a door-to-door salesperson trying to pitch a product nobody wanted. Weird. It's almost like that's a reasonable question that deserves an answer. She walked into our living room and looked around like she was seeing it for the first time. I'd been living the bachelor life for 4 whole days, which meant there were exactly 3 dishes in the sink, 1 empty beer bottle on the coffee table, and a pizza box that I'd been too lazy to throw away. The place looked better than it had when she lived here full-time. "We need to talk," she announced, settling onto the couch with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for soap opera death scenes. "I'm listening," I said, not bothering to pause the baseball game I was watching. The Yankees were up by 3 runs in the 7th inning, and honestly, that was more compelling than whatever Sophie was about to say. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I realize we both made mistakes." Both. There's that word that people use when they want to spread blame around like peanut butter on toast, making sure everyone gets an equal share regardless of who actually deserves it. Interesting perspective. Tell me more about these mutual mistakes. "You were hurt that I didn't want to help Adrian, and I was hurt that you wouldn't help Melissa. We both let our pride get in the way of supporting each other." I muted the TV and turned to face her, genuinely curious about where this was going. "So your position is that refusing to help my homeless brother and expecting me to bankroll your criminal sister's legal defense are morally equivalent. When you put it like that, it sounds accurate." She shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing that her carefully rehearsed speech wasn't landing the way she'd hoped. "I'm trying to find a compromise here, Lucas." "What kind of compromise?" "You help Adrian retroactively travel back in time to when he was sleeping in his car, and I'll consider contributing to Melissa's unfair legal troubles." That's when Sophie decided to go nuclear. She stood up, crossed her arms, and delivered what she clearly thought was the ultimate checkmate move. "Help Melissa with her legal fees, or we're done." I stared at her for a long moment, then did something that surprised both of us. I started laughing. Not a polite chuckle or a nervous giggle, but the kind of deep, belly-shaking laughter that happens when someone tells you the most ridiculous joke you've ever heard. I laughed so hard I nearly pulled something in my abdomen. Tears were streaming down my face, and I had to grab the arm of my chair to keep from falling over. Sophie stood there watching me like I'd just had some kind of mental breakdown, which honestly wasn't entirely inaccurate. "Sophie," I managed to gasp between fits of laughter. "We were done the moment you told me my brother's homelessness wasn't your concern. I just stuck around for the season finale." The look on her face was priceless. Pure, unfiltered shock mixed with the dawning realization that her nuclear option had just backfired spectacularly. She'd been expecting me to cave under pressure, to choose preserving our marriage over maintaining my principles. Instead, she'd just discovered that I'd already mentally filed for divorce weeks ago. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious. You want to know what the difference is between us, Sophie? When my family needed help, I helped them. When your family needed help, you expected me to help them. You spent our entire marriage teaching me that boundaries matter, that people need to handle their own problems, that family loyalty has limits." "Congratulations, I learned the lesson." She sat back down heavily, like someone had just told her that Santa Claus wasn't real and the Easter Bunny was a lie. "You're really going to throw away our marriage over this?" "I'm not throwing away anything. I'm just applying the same standards you've been preaching for 3 years. Remember? Not my circus, not my monkeys. Your family's issues aren't my burden." "Those were your words, sweetheart. I'm just returning them to sender." "But I love you." "No, you don't. You love the idea of having a husband who agrees with you when it's convenient and bankrolls your family when it's necessary. That's not love. That's having a personal assistant with benefits." That night, Sophie moved out for real this time. Not the dramatic, "I'm going to my parents' house until you apologize" move, but the actual, hiring a U-Haul and taking half the furniture kind of moving out. She kept muttering under her breath about how I'd changed, how I wasn't the man she married, how I'd become selfish and cruel. She was absolutely right, of course. I had changed. The man she married was a pushover who confused keeping the peace with keeping his dignity. The man packing her boxes was someone who'd learned that you can't build a healthy relationship with someone who thinks empathy is a one-way street. About 2 weeks later, I got a text from Adrian. Heard through the grapevine that Sophie moved out. "You okay, man?" "Better than okay." I texted back. "Want to grab a beer and hear about how ultimatums work when you stop caring about the consequences?" "Hell yes. But I'm buying. Family discount at the new sports bar downtown." That night, over wings and way too many beers, Adrian told me about his new promotion at work, his relationship with Derek's sister, apparently my brother had game, and his plans to start taking night classes toward a business degree. The guy was thriving in ways that had nothing to do with my money and everything to do with his determination to build something better for himself. "Thanks for having my back when I needed it," he said as we were settling the tab. "I know it cost you your marriage." "Nah," I replied, leaving a generous tip for our server. "It cost me a bad marriage. There's a difference." Meanwhile, Melissa was still unemployed, still internet famous for all the wrong reasons, and still facing the legal consequences of her actions. She'd eventually take a plea deal, probation, community service, fines, and mandatory AA meetings. No prison time. But her record was permanently tarnished, and her job prospects had gone from challenging to maybe consider a career change. And Sophie? Last I heard, she was living in a studio apartment across town, telling anyone who'd listened that her ex-husband was a vindictive asshole who'd abandoned her family in their time of need. She wasn't entirely wrong. I had abandoned her family, the same way she'd abandoned mine when it mattered most. Funny how that works out. There's something almost beautiful about watching someone's carefully constructed narrative crumble in real time. It's like seeing a house of cards collapse, except instead of 52 pieces of cardboard, it's built from lies, half-truths, and strategic omissions. Sophie, being Sophie, couldn't just gracefully exit our marriage and move on with her life. No, that would have required a level of self-awareness and maturity that she'd never actually demonstrated. Instead, she decided to launch what I like to call the Reputation Rehabilitation Tour, complete with carefully crafted social media posts and strategic conversations designed to paint herself as the victim of my sudden transformation into a heartless monster. The campaign started innocently enough. A few vague Facebook posts about learning who people really are during difficult times and grateful for true friends who see through the lies. Classic passive-aggressive social media behavior that could have been about anyone or anything. Maybe her boss was being unreasonable. Maybe she'd had a fight with a cashier at Target. Plausible deniability wrapped in inspirational quotes. But Sophie had never been particularly good at subtlety, and within a week, her posts were getting more specific. References to manipulative partners and people who change the rules when it suits them. Screenshots of articles about emotional abuse and gaslighting, shared without comment but with obvious implications. Her friends' circle ate it up like vultures at a roadkill buffet. The comments sections filled up with supportive messages from women who'd clearly only heard Sophie's version of events. "You deserve so much better, girl," and his loss, honestly, and the ever-popular "men ain't shit" declaration that seems to be the rallying cry for divorced women seeking validation. I watched this whole performance with the detached fascination of an anthropologist studying tribal behavior. It was actually kind of impressive how quickly Sophie had managed to flip the narrative from woman refuses to help homeless brother-in-law to woman victimized by cruel husband. She had a real talent for selective storytelling. Then Tanya Garcia decided to get involved. Tanya was one of Sophie's work friends, the type of woman who treated other people's drama like her personal entertainment system. She'd never liked me. Something about my negative energy or my failure to properly appreciate Sophie's growth journey or some other new age bullshit that sounded profound but meant absolutely nothing. Tanya sent me a text at 11:30 on a Thursday night, clearly after a few glasses of wine and a lengthy conversation with Sophie about what a terrible person I was. "Just wanted you to know that you're a piece of garbage for abandoning Sophie when her family needed help. Real men support their wives instead of playing petty games. Hope you're happy with yourself." Now, I could have ignored this text, could have blocked Tanya's number and gone on with my life, could have taken the high road and let Sophie's friends believe whatever narrative made them feel better about their own life choices. But I had receipts. Beautiful, irrefutable, audio-recorded receipts. I sent Tanya the same voice memo I'd played for Sophie during our candlelit steak dinner. The one where Sophie clearly and definitively stated that my family's issues weren't her burden. No context, no explanation, just Sophie's own voice delivering her philosophy of selective compassion in crystal-clear audio. Tanya's response came back in less than 2 minutes. "Oh, that was it. Just oh." The sound of a narrative collapsing under the weight of actual evidence. But here's the thing about truth in the age of social media. It spreads faster than gossip, and it's a lot harder to argue with. Tanya, being the drama-loving person she was, apparently couldn't resist sharing this new information with other people in Sophie's circle. Not maliciously, necessarily, but more like someone who'd just discovered a really interesting piece of gossip and couldn't help but pass it along. Within a few days, the audio clip was making the rounds through Sophie's friend group like a virus. Not posted publicly. Everyone was too smart for that, but shared privately between friends who were suddenly seeing a very different side of the story. The comments on Sophie's posts started changing. Instead of unconditional support, people were asking more pointed questions. Wait, what exactly happened with Lucas's brother? And I'm confused about the timeline here, and the always devastating. Can we hear both sides of this story? Sophie tried to control the narrative by posting a longer explanation about how the situation was complicated and how people didn't understand the full context. But once that audio clip was out there, all her explanations sounded like exactly what they were: desperate attempts to justify behavior that looked pretty shitty when exposed to daylight. The friend group split faster than a boy band after their first major disagreement. Half of them ditched Sophie entirely, deciding they didn't want to be associated with someone who'd been exposed as a hypocrite. The other half stuck around, but with a noticeable reduction in enthusiasm. Their supportive comments became more cautious, their invitations less frequent. Sophie tried to rally the remaining troops by doubling down on her victim narrative, but it was too late. The damage was done. Everyone now knew that the woman who was complaining about her husband's lack of support had refused to support her homeless brother-in-law. The contradiction was too obvious to ignore, even for people who wanted to believe her version of events. The best part came when her cousin Diego chimed in on the family group chat. Diego was Roberto's nephew, a straight-talking guy who worked construction and had zero patience for bullshit. He'd apparently been following the whole drama from the sidelines, and he finally decided to weigh in with his characteristic diplomacy. Hold up, he wrote in a message that got screenshotted and shared faster than a celebrity sex tape. Didn't Sophie refuse to help Adrian when he was homeless? Why should anyone help Melissa? At least Adrian didn't commit any crimes. The family group chat exploded. Cousins, aunts, uncles. Everyone suddenly had opinions about the double standard that Sophie had been trying to hide. Some family members who hadn't known about the Adrian situation were genuinely shocked. Others who had suspected there was more to the story finally felt comfortable speaking up. Roberto and Clara tried to keep the peace, but even they couldn't defend Sophie's position once all the facts were out in the open. The family that Sophie had been counting on for support was now questioning her judgment and her version of events. It was like watching a live-streamed roast, except instead of comedians making jokes, it was Sophie's own family and friends calling out her hypocrisy in real time. I almost made popcorn to properly enjoy the show. The coup de grace came when Diego posted a follow-up message that somehow managed to summarize the entire situation in one devastating sentence. Family helps family, unless you're Sophie and it's inconvenient. That message got liked by 12 family members, including 2 of Sophie's aunts and her favorite cousin Maria. Sophie's carefully constructed victim narrative had been completely demolished, not by me or anyone else with an agenda, but by her own words and actions. The internet had spoken, the family had weighed in, and the verdict was unanimous. She'd been exposed as exactly what she was: selfish, hypocritical, and completely lacking in self-awareness. The woman who thought she could control the narrative had just learned a valuable lesson about the difference between perception and reality. Too bad she was too proud to actually learn from it. Fast forward 6 months, and let me paint you a picture of how this whole beautiful disaster played out. Adrian moved in with me permanently after Sophie's dramatic exit, and I gotta say, it's been the best roommate situation I've ever had. The guy's like a combination of a personal chef, cleaning service, and entertainment system all rolled into one. He cooks dinner most nights, real food, not the sad bachelor meals of microwave burritos and cereal for dinner that I'd been surviving on. Our new 2-bedroom place stays cleaner than a hospital operating room, mostly because Adrian has this weird thing about doing dishes immediately after using them instead of letting them pile up until they achieve sentience. He got promoted twice at the logistics company, which apparently happens when you show up on time, work hard, and don't spend your lunch breaks complaining about how unfair life is. Who would have thought? The kid's making 62 grand a year now, plus bonuses, and he's got his eye on a management position that would put him over 70 by the end of next year. He's also dating Derek's sister Emma, who turns out to be a nurse with a wicked sense of humor and the ability to keep up with Adrian's appetite for both food and bad movies. She comes over for dinner sometimes, and watching those two together is like seeing what healthy relationships actually look like. They support each other, laugh at each other's jokes, and somehow manage to have disagreements without anyone threatening to move out or withhold basic human compassion. You know what's weird? Adrian said one evening as we were assembling some ridiculously complicated IKEA bookshelf that had more parts than a Boeing 747. I actually feel grateful for that whole mess with my job and the car situation. Stockholm Syndrome, I suggested, holding a wooden panel while he tried to figure out which screw went where. Nah, man. I mean, it sucked at the time, but it taught me who I could count on. And it showed me what I'm actually capable of when I stop feeling sorry for myself and start taking action. The kid had a point. Sometimes the worst situations reveal the best truths about people, including yourself. Adrian had learned he was stronger and more resourceful than he'd given himself credit for. I'd learned that my marriage was built on quicksand and conditional support. Sophie had learned. Well, actually, I'm not sure Sophie learned anything, but we'll get to that. Roberto called me about a month after Sophie moved out, and the conversation was one of those moments that reminds you why some people are worth keeping in your life regardless of their family connections. Lucas, he said, I owe you an apology. Clara and I should have seen what was happening with Sophie years ago. We raised her better than that, but somewhere along the way, she got the idea that the world owed her something. You don't owe me anything, Roberto. Sophie's an adult. Her choices are her responsibility. Still, we wanted you to know that we don't agree with how she handled things. And we wanted to ask, would you and Adrian like to come over for Sunday dinner this week? Clara's been wanting to properly welcome Adrian to the family, and she's making her famous tamales. That Sunday dinner turned into a monthly tradition. Roberto and Clara treated Adrian like the son they'd never had, asking about his job, his girlfriend, his plans for the future. They genuinely cared about his answers, too, which was a novel experience for both of us. It was like having normal, functional in-laws for the first time in my adult life. During one of these dinners, Roberto pulled me aside and dropped a bomb that I probably should have seen coming. Melissa's living with us now, he said quietly, glancing toward the kitchen where Clara was loudly explaining tamale-making techniques to Adrian and Emma. Lost her apartment when she couldn't find work after that whole internet thing. How's that working out for you guys? Roberto's expression said everything I needed to know. She's turned into a professional victim. Spends most of her time on the couch, complaining about how unfair everything is, applying for jobs she's not qualified for, and explaining why nothing is ever her fault. Sounds exhausting. Clara's about ready to throw her out. 31 years old, and the girl acts like the world owes her a living because she made some mistakes. Meanwhile, your brother's out there building a career and a relationship and taking responsibility for his life. Different approaches to problem solving, I said diplomatically. Different character, Roberto corrected. That's what we're really talking about here. Sophie, meanwhile, was living her best single life, at least according to her Instagram posts. She'd moved into a trendy studio apartment downtown, the kind of place that looks great in photos but probably costs 70% of her income. Her social media was full of inspirational quotes about knowing your worth and attracting the right energy and living authentically. The best part? She'd started dating again. Her Bumble profile, which someone had screenshotted and sent to Adrian, who obviously shared it with me, was a masterpiece of self-delusion. She described herself as a family-oriented woman seeking a partner with strong moral values and a commitment to supporting each other through life's challenges. I laughed so hard when Adrian showed me that profile that I nearly needed medical attention. The woman who'd refused to let my homeless brother sleep on our couch was advertising for a family-oriented man. The same person who'd told me that other people's problems weren't her burden was looking for someone committed to supporting each other. The irony was so thick you could bottle it and sell it as a condiment. Think she'll find what she's looking for? Adrian asked, grinning as he put his phone away. Oh, absolutely. There's definitely a guy out there who wants a woman with strong boundaries about helping anyone except herself. Probably the same guy who's looking for a vegetarian who only eats meat and a fitness enthusiast who hates exercise. So no, not unless she finds someone even more selfish than she is, which would actually be pretty impressive. But here's the thing about life. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, and sometimes you get exactly what you deserve. Sophie wanted boundaries. She got them. She wanted independence. She got that too, along with a studio apartment, a string of failed first dates, and the growing realization that her authentic self wasn't particularly appealing to healthy, functional people. Meanwhile, Adrian and I had built something that actually worked. We'd proven that family doesn't have to be complicated if you stick to simple principles. Show up when people need you, celebrate their successes, support them through their failures, and don't keep score of who owes what to whom. One evening, about 8 months after Sophie's departure, Adrian and I were sitting on our couch watching the playoffs and sharing a pizza that was definitely too large for 2 people, but somehow exactly the right size for our appetites. "Thanks for having my back, bro," he said during a commercial break, completely out of nowhere. "That's what family does," I replied, stealing another slice before he could claim it. "I know, but seriously, you could have listened to Sophie. Could have let me figure it out on my own. Could have chosen the easy path." I thought about that for a minute, about all the different ways this story could have played out. I could have been the husband who prioritized peace over principles, who chose his marriage over his brother, who decided that other people's problems really weren't his burden. Instead, I'd learned something valuable. Family isn't about blood or marriage certificates or legal obligations. It's about showing up when it matters, even when it's inconvenient. It's about saying, "I got you," instead of "not my problem." It's about building something together instead of protecting what you already have. And sometimes, when you're lucky enough to find people who understand that, you realize you've already won the only game that actually matters. "Move over," I told Adrian, reaching for the remote. "I got you, and you're hogging the good spot on the couch."